So we talk about the brand at always being at the center and having a purpose. And from that radiates all the different touch points that the brand has to express itself in the world. Not all of that do we touch, but we set up the standards and we set up the vision, and we set up, where and how the brand should look and live in a style guide. We've also incorporated a lot of cross-functional agency partners that get together that they might manage the digital aspect, or they might manage the PR aspect of it, or the media, getting all the work together and talking about the work so that it all feels consistent. You're going to feel a better experience for the brand rather than disjointed, what I call marketing stunts that some brands do to get, quick awareness.
Welcome to It's Marketing's Fault, podcast where we discuss how to do marketing the right way. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford. I'm thrilled today because I have with me Jim Pietruszynski. He is the CEO of Soulsight, which is a brand design agency with 30 plus years of experience in building emotive brands that move. He's worked with global giants like Kraft Heinz, Coca-Cola, Pfizer, so many more. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Hey, it is my pleasure. Now, I really liked that description of emotive brands that move. So when we talk about emotive brands, would you just define what an emotive brand is and what it looks like?
So, what we focus on when we say emotive brand is a brand that emotionally is making that connection between brand and person, or brand and human. It's the emotion that's just deciding the decision-making and behavior that you feel. Interestingly enough, in our research, over 95% of our decisions are made in our subconscious with emotion. We just don't realize it. It's information that's come from Harvard, and we're working with a professor at the University of Illinois. And so we've kind of doubled down on a space that we've always kind of lived in, and is using empathy to understand who we're targeting and what our client partners need, but going a little bit further and digging into, what does it mean? How can we take the subjectivity out of just defining what an emotion is for a brand? We all get briefs where we have an emotional reason to believe that's put together by the team of marketers, but we don't really know for certain whether that's actually correct or not. And it's always fuzzy. Kind of as you move through the assignment, it falls off the ladder, or falls off the areas of consideration. But if 95% of our purchase behaviors are made in our subconscious, it seemed like something we should be paying more attention to. So to differentiate ourselves, we've really pushed hard into kind of like where the agency began, but really focusing back on the energy of what emotion means and how that gets validated. And I think when we think about emotions, it's really talking about those powerful insights and and proprietary ideas that can come from that. I think that also those emotions help actually validate why the creative is coming forward. And it sounds a little bit fuzzy, but we're working with a research partner to come up with a process where we can quantitatively try to have individuals assign emotions to particular objects, and then really understand if we're on track, so that when we present to the leadership team with some of our client partners, there is some validation to emotion. And then we're comparing quantitative choice results to where those emotions are at, and we're seeing some traction there.
Wow. That's fascinating. 95% of our buying decisions, where it comes from is emotion. And you're trying to quantify that emotion. Now, is this like all kinds of emotion, or is this like the warm fuzzies, or does it just depend on like the product? How does that work?
Great question. I think it's a typical human being can probably name 5 or 6 emotions off the top of their head. And there are core emotions. We tend to, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Wilcox's emotion wheel, but it spans, hundreds of different emotions that are subcategorized under, some main core 5 or 6 emotions. We're trying to identify 8 to 10 that are, more often used and able to be defined by, generally by human beings, because we don't think that way. We feel and then respond, but we don't think about what emotion is in our decision making process, unless we are, really mindful. And I think that's really difficult to do in our day and age. And, when we think of mindfulness and, marketing, I don't know that those often go hand in hand.
No, that tends not to have much overlap. But that's fascinating when you're talking about that emotion wheel. I've seen it. I've got a copy of it somewhere on my computer. Like, I can totally visualize it. When you're looking at trying to identify maybe those 8 to 10, are you talking about like on the very outside of the wheel?
More towards the center.
More towards the core.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
So that you can really kind of latch onto those, whether it's excitement or happiness or sadness or any of
Right.
those types of emotion. So what does that do? So from a brand perspective then, or a product perspective, are you helping them sort of shape their narrative in terms of what their brand will evoke in people? Or when people have an emotion, like, I don't know, let's say fear or sadness, like a brand will come to mind that will help sort of move them through that emotion to something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, because so you have the tension or the need that you're trying to solve, but then also understanding how if something, if you're trying to evoke happiness, you want happiness to be exuded with the brand, and you want people to feel that happiness when they see it. We talk about it as inspiring brand affinity. So, like, I understand the brand affinity; it means something to me, and then that drives the purchase intent. When we've seen I've been in the business for 30 years. So, and if you've been in marketing, there's a lot of quantitative testing done that the results come back glowing. And when it gets in a market, it doesn't, things don't line up, and vice versa, where we've decided not to go down the quantitative path and, do all the risk management, but do a test market, and things have done incredibly well. So there's no exact science to figuring out what and how things will do once they're in their physical space or their home. I think what understanding the emotion hopefully will bring us, greater success in whether that's in innovation, brand revitalization, or brand repositioning for some of the brands we work with.
Now that makes sense. And I like that idea of trying to quantify very much that qualitative feel and aspect, but appreciating that there is that tension. So really, sometimes we think of brands and logos immediately pop into our head, right? There are certain brands you just boom and it's immediately in your mind. But I know brands have to be more than a logo, right?
Absolutely.
So what are a couple of foundation pieces for a brand to be a brand, so to speak?
So we talk about the brand at always being at the center and having a purpose. And from that radiates all the different touch points that the brand has to express itself in the world. So call it brand world. Not all of that do we touch, but we set up the standards, and we set up the vision, and we set up, where and how the brand should look and live in a style guide. We've also incorporated a lot of cross-functional agency partners that get together, that they might manage the digital aspect, or they might manage the PR aspect of it, or the media, getting all the work together and talking about the work so that it all feels consistent. You're going to feel a better experience for the brand, rather than disjointed, what I call marketing stunts that some brands do to get, quick awareness. But those are short-lived, and they don't really hold. If you're trying to create something that's iconic and lasting.
So true. Yeah. The consistency across the spectrum is critical, whether it's, I mean, honestly, even down to the minutia of font and color and everything else. You can definitely tell when brands miss that, or it's like when you're looking at something and it just everything feels inconsistent. It feels unfinished, so to speak. You also talk about purpose in there. You mentioned purpose. So is this like, would you elaborate on what purpose is?
So the purpose is why the brand exists. So figuring out, why does this brand exist? Is there really a need for it? The purpose has to fulfill some kind of need or develop some tension to be able to be interesting in the marketplace. I think that if it doesn't have a purpose, it's kind of missing a soul. So it's interesting how purpose and soul can kind of come together, but that should be able to be picked up on and understood, and not really have to be explained to people.
Gotcha. So it's sort of that undercurrent that just it is what the brand is. It's like what it does. Do you help then articulate that? Because I'm guessing with that purpose, there at least has to have there's at least some documentation, some ideas of okay, we want to make sure it fits X, Y, Z or Z or whatever it is. How
Absolutely.
does that change over time? Is that the same? How does that work?
It can change. It definitely can change over time. I think it always is good to revisit to make sure that we're staying relevant. Things change quicker than ever now because of how fast, innovation is moving things into different marketplaces. And you think about, traditional, brick and mortar shopping versus e-commerce and CPG. And it's a different, now there are more digital assets that are needed more than just a pack on shelf and shopper marketing. There's another dimension that is formed with it. I think when we're part of really pulling these things together is understanding what the human truths are with product truths and where those intersect. And that really helps drive that motivating behavior that we're looking for in decision making. So slot emotion then in there, and we have an extra layer of ways to look at things in a more, I wouldn't say more strategic, but with a different layer of information.
So that makes sense. How does something like culture sort of influence purpose, or is purpose outside of culture?
It's definitely part of culture. We do still utilize the 4C structure when we're doing analysis of brands and understanding how in culture where this brand fits. I think what's important to remember when we look at culture is not generalizing a culture or a stereotype to fit a brand, and you can't be everything to everybody. I think that with more and more brands being launched every year, and some that leave, some that just disappear, again, that relevancy of making sure that the culture we're going after, we're not creating stereotypes or using stereotypes, but really using empathy to understand what's going on in culture. I used to say that I have a interest in anthropology and more on the cultural side. And, the brands that we pick up and the brands we use are a reflection of what is happening in our culture today. If we wanted to look back and learn. So what we're doing is we're always moving with culture to define what it looks like at any given point, so you can look at clothing, you can look at products, you can look at all different types of electronics and see how those affected culture and where they fit in and evolved to where we are today. We are always looking ahead and trying to predict ahead with innovation to see like where things are going. It's exciting to see. It's exciting to think in that way, and also lead where kind of be a trendsetter in terms of like where and how things are going.
So, and just off the top of your head, do you know of any what's a brand or two that seems to be doing this well? I mean, it could be one that you're working with. It could be something totally different. What's one or two that are like, man, I think this business, this group is hitting it well.
Yeah, one I think that's doing a great job is that we've seen some brand coalitions. So Coca-Cola owns Topo Chico mineral water. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They now have come out with Topo Chico that is spiked. So it's spiked sparkling water, ranch water. So they're using an authentic brand. Coke's name's not on the package. They own the product, but they produce the product, and the combination between those brands coming together with the knowledge and the distribution and the firepower that they have is super compelling. I loved Topo Chico when it was a sparkling water, but you can't find it anywhere. But it's really building some momentum and awareness for Topo Chico to exist in more occasions.
I like that. So it's where instead of Coke trying to make it a Coke, with a Coke brand or under the Coke logo, so to speak, it sounds like they're using the best of the Coke infrastructure to really take Topo Chico and help it be the most it can be, so to speak.
Yes, and we're very fortunate to be able to work with both sets of marketing teams. So you get the insights from both sets of the marketing team, the dynamic of how they work together. And I guess we're sort of in the middle of like producing what ultimately, drives the product. So, but again, like feeling privileged to have the ability to be able to be at the table.
Oh, I love that. Just being able to get that perspective and see what both sides are doing, having the benefit of a very, I'll say niche brand, but you kind of use that a little bit versus like Coke, which is like this. I mean, it's a Goliath. It's huge, and seeing that difference, I'm sure, is fascinating.
Yes.
So you talk about the idea of emotive brands. You talk about having purpose in the brands, but what about people? So, like, does it matter the people that you have within, like, the brand marketing and the brand itself as you're producing that? Can you just drop anybody in there, or does it? Are you looking for some specific strategic people to be involved in order to make that happen?
I think in our business, it's not very transactional. So that our people, our creatives, our strategists, they produce, they're our product. Their creative intelligence is our product. So you can't really drop in someone who, might be a great designer, might have great style on their own. We look for people that can be very diverse in the way that they think and the way that they execute, and also be able to translate strategy, like build strategy, but also translate it to design. So understanding how that strategy flow moves from words to visualization and then activation. So yeah, not everyone has the right the ability, especially in the creative world, to be able to use that, what I call the middle brain. Like you're using a little bit of the right and your left brain to produce something. I started out as a designer in this business, so I can understand the creative end of it. And I built our strategy team, our account team. Worked very many different roles of the agency, because we started with 3 people and we're about 80 now. So had to grow up, just kind of learning on the fly. But yeah, once you understand, the quality of work is good, but then how do you talk about it? How can you explain why you chose a color, a font, an image, or a structure? Like those are the why is super important to us. And I don't think it's something you can teach. I think it's something that you inherently learn and then can build upon.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, there's from me as a marketer, I am not a visual designer. So from that creative aspect of like I am a wordsmith. So I do writing and I do various sort of content pieces for that. So I appreciate I get I get lost when I think of color. Like I am so lost, but that hasn't been part of my work palette. It hasn't been something that I've been involved with. So you're really looking for people not only who can deal with design, but they can deal with the why behind it, and then they can also speak to it and then bring that together then with content as well to make it unified.
Exactly.
I love it. So let me ask one more thing before we kind of wrap up. Any takeaway? So people listening to this, wherever they're at in the marketing sphere, if they're thinking about man, I like this idea of emotive, I like this idea of purpose, maybe I'm not really doing it. Any takeaways you would like to leave them with?
I think one thing that we have to consider as things move faster and faster is to be successful in brand marketing. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Like it takes time to get established. And when we work with some of our partners, they want quick growth. They want their shareholders to understand that things are moving. The market's really volatile. It's very competitive. And even on our end, when we're competing for work. So, I think there's a lot of other factors that go into that. And it requires a lot of patience. But the part of the brand, the brand design part of it, or the marketing side of it, is you got to have the passion and you got to have the grit to like get in there and get it done.
That's the grit to get it done. I like how you say that, describe that, because I think sometimes we don't consider that in the marketing realm, right? We think very, very much what's created, but not the fact that it is this long journey to really make it happen, and you have to stick to it. Otherwise, you just don't last, and products and companies don't grow.
Yeah.
That I appreciate that, Jim. So for everybody who is listening, Jim, if people want to know more about you, they want to know more about Soulsight, where do you want them to go?
Our website is soulsight.com. SOULSIGHT, one word, no space. Or you can email at info@soulsight.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn by searching my first and last name, Jim Pietruszynski. I think I might be one of these besides family that have that last name in all of LinkedIn.
Oh, well, for everybody listening, we'll drop all those links in the show notes. Definitely reach out to Jim, check out Soulsight, and really get on board with what they're doing from a brand perspective. If 95% of our buying decisions are really are more emotion driven than anything else, like, man, that changes the spectrum, because I know for me, I always think logic has something to do with it. And yet when I look at my buying decisions, I'm like, that's not always the case. So would encourage everybody to reach out and connect with Jim. This has been fun. I have learned a ton from you. I'm looking forward to going back through it and checking my notes and reviewing. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it and appreciated the time with you.